Hey guys, and welcome back to my channel, Jayden.reads. A couple of weeks ago, I was really sick. I had a really intense bout of the flu, and I was just sitting in my living room on my couch, which is right across from where I'm filming, staring up at my bookshelf, and I had been home from work for like a week, and it had been an awful week. Like, you know when you're so sick that you can't even really process what's going on around you, and you're just kind of staring at walls and just useless? That's how I was. And I was feeling like I have all this downtime and I want to read. And I'd been kind of feeling like that. Like I wanted to pick up a book, but I was like, I just don't have the energy to pick up a book. And finally, when I was laying on my couch, staring up at this bookshelf, this little book right here caught my eye. I had read The Hunger Games many times, many years ago, you know, when they first came out. And I had kind of been wanting to reread them anyway, because I knew that I really loved them when they came out, but I couldn't really, like, I remember the story, but I just didn't remember all of those reasons. And you know, when you love a book, it's fun to get involved with it again. And so I had wanted to reread it, but then sitting there and being so sick, I was like, this is the perfect opportunity because I don't have the energy to read something that I haven't read before. Like, I don't have the energy to process new information, but I do have the energy to revisit an old favorite, if that makes sense. So I just barely reread all of the Hunger Games, or I guess like the entire Hunger Games series. And as I was reading, I started thinking about everybody's opinions of Katniss. When I was reading the books, I know there were a lot of people who really hated Katniss and they just were really against her. And then reading Mockingjay, everybody was like, ew, she's such a player, she's so horrible, she's all of these things. And I kind of thought the same thing too. Reading through these books this time, I was like, what? Like, why does everybody hate her? I actually really, really like Katniss, nor do I think that she was being a player, because everybody seemed to have something bad to say about the girl who was on fire. I decided I needed to make this video in defense of Katniss Everdeen. It's okay if your opinions are different. Growing up and reading her story again, I guess, and reading it when I was older, more mature, all of those things, I've realized Katniss is not a bad person. Like, nor do I find her annoying, even though I did when I read it the first time. So anyway, I'm just gonna jump into the video and tell you the reasons that I think Katniss is a lot better than the reputation that she currently has. And oh, before I jump into my reasons, I do want to say, when I originally thought of the idea of making this video, I was still in Catching Fire, I think, and I was like, you know what, I'm going to need a preface in my video that this is only based on Hunger Games and Catching Fire. It's not based on Mockingjay because everybody hated Mockingjay and it wasn't well written and like Katniss was not acting like herself. Having reread all the books, I loved Mockingjay. And like, I know why I didn't like it when it first came out, but I really like it now. And I actually think Katniss was really true to herself through the entire story. So I will be talking about Katniss from Hunger Games through Mockingjay, not just the first two. And I do want to say, I had a really long conversation with my husband about why we didn't like Mockingjay when it first came out. And we kind of realized that it boiled down to the promises that authors make. So for example, if you pick up Harry Potter and you read through the first one, even within the first chapter, you know that it's going to be quirky, it's going to be funny, it's going to discuss magic, and it's going to have really fun and lovable characters. And after you finish the first book, you know that it's going to start with summer at the Dursleys. Harry is going to go to Hogwarts, and then he's going to have some kind of interaction with Voldemort or some kind of evil thing that takes place, and then have the denouement and go back home. And then the pattern repeats over and over and over again in books 1 through 6. And it's a pattern that most people really love. And that's why these books are so successful. And then when book 7 came out, we did not follow that pattern. We started at the Dursleys, but we don't make it to Hogwarts until like the very end. There isn't magical learning, and we're kind of fighting the entire time. And yes, at the end we do face off with Voldemort, but the main chunk of the book is very different than the main chunk of the first 6. And so it felt like these are all of the characters that I love and that I know, and I want to know what happens to them, but the story doesn't feel succinct, right? Like, you're not fulfilling the promises that you gave me before, where we were going to go Dursley's Hogwarts fight. Now we're doing some weird different thing. And on its own, Deathly Hallows and Mockingjay are both really, really good books, and they have a lot of good to them, But when you're expecting a certain pattern before, and then this pattern completely breaks, it can be really upsetting. And the style of Mockingjay or the style of Deathly Hallows may not be a style of book that you would have picked up originally, but you need to pick it up and read it because you're so invested in the previous books that it can feel kind of like a betrayal. So I think that that's how a lot of us felt when Mockingjay first came out, because, you know, we're used to the pattern of going to the Hunger Games, having the beforehand of like the reaping and then the training and the getting ready and then being in the games. Very similar things happen in Hunger Games and Catching Fire, and so we know that it's a pattern we can rely on, or we've come to expect that we will rely on this pattern. And we like the pattern, and that's why we stuck with the story. And Mockingjay doesn't follow that pattern, and so it can feel, like I said, like a huge betrayal. But having read them before and knowing that Mockingjay was going to be different, I was able to go into it with like my eyes wide open, I guess. And so I was really able to appreciate Mockingjay more on its own rather than an extension of the Hunger Games, if that makes sense. And so I really enjoyed the book, but I also understand why people don't. And I understand why people may say that Katniss feels different to them in Mockingjay than she does in the other books, and that's all okay. I just wanted to establish that all from the beginning, that I do enjoy Mockingjay, I do like Katniss, and hopefully that makes my reasons make more sense. Whatever. Now we're finally getting into the purpose of this video and talking about my defenses of Katniss Everdeen. The first one is the whole love triangle mess. I'm personally not a huge fan of love triangles. I think that they add a lot of unnecessary drama and they're kind of annoying. And I think a lot of people feel that way, and that's maybe why authors aren't doing it as much as of late. At least I think they aren't. But anyway, I don't like the love triangle in Hunger Games. I will say, I know a lot of people had problems with Katniss because of the way that she navigated that love triangle, but I don't think that those claims are founded or fair. I guess what I mean by that is, as you read the books, you come to realize that Gale has feelings for Katniss. Katniss mentions, even from like the beginning of the book, like in one of the very first chapters, when you first meet Gale, that there's never been anything romantic between them. And she brings that up several other times. So like when she volunteers for Prim, and then she goes to the Justice Building in the very first one in Hunger Games, and Gale comes in to see her, she says, there's never been anything romantic between us, but when he opens his arms, like for a hug or something, I don't hesitate to run into them. Which makes sense, right? Because if somebody had been my best friend for 10 years, and we had helped support each other through something really hard, which would be like our dads dying in the same mine explosion and then being responsible for feeding our families. And we're both the oldest children of these families that are starving in this like decrepit district. Yeah, we're going to be close and we're going to share a lot with each other. Like with knowing that I'm probably going to die, even if I don't have anything romantic with that friend, you know, if I'm heterosexual and they're a female and they want to hug me, I'm going to hug them. Like, it's not because there's a romantic connection, it's because that's a normal reaction, right? And so all of these things in Katniss's mind are her even saying, yeah, there's nothing romantic, but like he was comforting to me. And then when he's leaving and getting pulled out, he's like, Katniss, remember but then he never actually gets to say what he wants her to remember. And he like, you know, when you get to know more of the story, it kind of implies, oh, maybe he was going to say, like, remember, I love you or something. But even then, if he's never done anything to show romantic interest in her, even if he says, remember, I love you, well, friends can love each other. And if she's about to die, or he thinks she's about to die, it might be an appropriate time to be like, remember, I love you, I'm rooting for you, I'm going to take care of your family. That doesn't necessarily mean romantic love, right? And if Katniss is completely overwhelmed and has just taken the spot of her sister, but knows that she's likely going to die, and she's 16 years old, it's just not likely that she's sitting there thinking like, I wonder if he was going to say that he has a crush on me. Like, it's just not fair to pin that on her. And then she's going through the games, and, you know, they had the interview with Caesar Flickerman, and Peeta's like, oh yeah, I've always had a crush on Katniss, and tries to like play that whole thing off. And Katniss is really mad because she's like, you're embarrassing me in front of everybody and that's not true and all of these things, you know, and she has this altercation with Peeta where she kind of beats him up. and all that. And like, yes, that's a little far. I agree with that. But it's also like everything in that, the way that Peeta responds to her, Haymitch, Cinna, Portia, all of those people make it seem to Katniss like it's just an act, because they know that that's how she'll go through with it in the arena, and that's how they ultimately end up surviving. But Peeta, and I think readers alike, get really mad and frustrated with Katniss that she's doing these things, like she's saying nice things to Peeta, and she's really not saying like things that are leading him on, in my opinion. She's like racking her mind to tell him about things she can even tell him about. She like tells him about Prim's goat and stuff. But yeah, she is kissing him, but because that's what they're supposed to do to stay alive. She thinks that's their decided upon strategy, and Haymitch is sending them gifts and all of these things. And like, just because she goes back to team up with Peeta and be allies does not mean that she has a romantic interest in him. Cato and Clove also pair up and are allies once that rule is made, and it's not because they have a romantic interest. It's one, because it will be easier for them to stay alive if there's two of them, which is a given. And also, too, because they probably, I mean, I know that they're from District 2 and they're the, you know, the careers or whatever. But even that being said, just because they're the careers and they know that they've been raised in a certain way and that they, you know, are going to need to fight to the death and it will bring honor to their district, all those things, that doesn't mean that they're bloodthirsty creatures who revel in killing other people. And so if they know that they can, you know, they can still complete the games, they don't have to die, but they can keep someone else alive, I think most people would do that and would go for that. And so Katniss choosing to go back for Peeta, Katniss like nursing Peeta and keeping him alive, Katniss going and risking her life to get him the medicine and all of those things, does not mean she loves him. I think they mean that she's a decent person, because I think that's what anybody would do. Even if there was somebody that I really detested from my district and we got reaped together, and then that rule was made that we could like stay together, I would try to save their life, because I would much rather be saving lives than taking lives. I just don't think that Katniss is being misleading. And then Peeta gets really mad at her, you know, and he's like, I can't believe you were acting. And she's like, but I thought you were acting. Like, and it's all really confusing for her. And then they get off the train at District 12, like once they get done with the Hunger Games, and, you know, her and Peeta had that discussion on the train of Peeta being really upset with her. She gets off the train and Gale, like, doesn't want to come visit with her. He doesn't want to come talk to her because she's mad. He's mad that she kissed Peeta on screen. And so she has to go seek him out and be like, hey, Gale, I just went through, I don't know, like the hardest thing that's ever happened to me, and I've almost died, and also I pulled this stunt with the berries because it's not even just because she wanted to defy the Capitol, but because I think she wanted to save a life and do a decent thing. She didn't want to just take Peeta's life for no reason, because there was no reason for them to be killing each other in the first place. So yeah, she's like, yeah, that was really scary and really terrifying, and I'm probably going to have PTSD like for the rest of my life, and I'm really confused, and the only person who really understands what just happened to me is Peeta, but now he's mad at me because I guess I don't have a crush on him, and I didn't even really know that he has a crush on me, and you're my best friend, and I want to be able to talk to you, and now you're avoiding me. And then all of a sudden Gale just kisses her, you know? And he's like, well, what do you think, Katniss? What do you feel? Like, don't you like me? Don't you know that I've always had a crush on you? And she's like, no. And like, why does that matter right now? I can't blame her for feeling that way, because I would feel the same way. I would honestly feel so objectified and be like, okay, there are really big things going on right now. I don't know why everybody cares so much about who I have a crush on or who I want to get with romantically. I'm 16 years old. I may not even be interested in anybody in that way yet. I've had things going on in my life that haven't really spared me the time to stop and think about that. And also, she's expressed several times that she doesn't even care to get married. And so she's like, I'm not interested in that. I'm not looking for that. And I'm going through some really hard things, and I'm really annoyed that people won't take me seriously because they just want to know who I have a crush on or who I'm kissing at the time. Like, that should not be relevant. That should be left out of all of this. And so I really understand her frustration. And then I feel like, especially Gale, really manipulates her and acts really grumpy to her all the time, and will be like, you just don't even care about me. You only care about Peeta. You only care about me when I'm hurting, and all these things. And so then Katniss is trying to be like, no, I don't. Like, I care about you, Gale. But he, like, doesn't really believe her unless she's, like, dishing out physical affection. So then she tries that, but then he gets mad at her, and then she's like, okay, no more. I don't know. I really don't like Gale. I think he's really frustrating and manipulative and annoying. I just don't blame her for feeling so confused. And even in Catching Fire, when Gale is, like, laying out on the kitchen table and he's just been whipped, you know, for hunting, and Katniss decides to kiss him, she kisses him because she decides that she wants to, like, choose Gale over Peeta. But she hasn't heard about the quarter quell yet. And what I interpreted that as was more like she's choosing a life in the districts, or like she's wanting to hold on to the old. So like she wants what's familiar to her, and Gale is familiar to her. District 12 is familiar to her. All of that life is familiar to her. And so she's trying to say, like, I choose this life. I don't want to choose a life where I have to be a mentor with Peeta, and we have to go back and we have to pretend to be in love, and people are going to be invested in my life in ways that I don't want them to, and I'm going to be manipulated by the Capitol again. No, I really think that she chose Gale, not because she was choosing Gale, but because she was choosing her life in the district. But these boys have kind of been manipulating her, and especially Gale, and so she's like, okay, in order to make this choice, I guess I need to kind of have a romantic connection with him, so I'm going to try it out and give him a little kiss. And it's just a little kiss when he is, like, drugged up, which isn't great. But she also is expecting him to not remember it, right? And then she ends up going into the arena with Peeta, again, obviously. But there hasn't been anything romantic happening between the two of them either. And her and Peeta also have a really good conversation where Peeta says, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have been mad at you. You were right. Like, it's okay that you don't have feelings for me. Let's just be friends. And so they decide to just be friends. And yes, like, they sleep in the same compartment together and things, but they're both suffering from nightmares, and they both think that, like, I'm gonna die so that you can stay alive and all these things. And so I really don't think that it's that crazy that they would want to spend that time together. And even though it's typically seen as something that's really intimate, like, once again, as a heterosexual female, if I had a friend, a really close friend who had been through something traumatic with me, who was also a heterosexual female, and we were going to experience something traumatic together again, and we knew that we couldn't stop it, but we were, like, really comforting for each other, I would be like, yeah, I have nightmares all the time remembering this traumatic thing that happened. Do you want to sleep in the same bed? Do you want to stay in the same room? Because I don't really like being alone. And, like, that would not mean that we were romantically interested, right? So I don't think that that's Katniss leading Peeta on, especially when they've had a big conversation about we're just friends. And Peeta says that he understands and acknowledges that. And then they go into the arena, and they end up kissing, like, once in the arena in Catching Fire. And that's because Katniss initiates it, because Katniss feels inside that she wants it. And she even says, I wish the cameras weren't here because I feel like I'm really feeling something for Peeta, and I'm worried because I know that, like, I'm going to die and that he's going to live on, but I think I have, like, feelings for him, and so she chooses to, like, kiss him. And she wants to keep kissing him, but she gets interrupted, all of those things. But I think that's Katniss acknowledging that she has actual feelings for Peeta. And then obviously in Mockingjay, people get mad at her again for the whole love triangle thing. But rereading it this time, I'm like, there really isn't that much that goes on. She, like, kisses Gale maybe twice in Mockingjay. One of them is in her home. When she's gone back to District 12, she's, like, gathering up medical supplies for her family. They're there to do a propo, and something about it, I know, I can't remember what, but something has been, like, really traumatic and really hard for Katniss. And so she's like, I need some alone time. I'm going back to my house. And she starts gathering all these materials, and Gale follows her, and he knows that she's emotionally vulnerable at this time. He follows her. He comes in, and he starts telling her, like, oh, yeah, I know that you're going to choose Peeta because, like, you just always choose whoever is hurting the most. And, like, Peeta is really hurting, and so he's going to be, like, the person that you choose. And she's like, I don't know, Gale, like, that's not entirely fair. But also, I think Katniss honestly feels a lot of anxiety and a lot of guilt for things that she doesn't need to, which it makes sense that she would be feeling that way because of the messages that she's received from other people, and maybe just some of her own internal demons. So she starts to be like, oh my gosh, Gale, like, you're right, I'm so horrible, I'm so awful. But that doesn't mean that she is horrible or awful. It means that's how she's interpreting the situation. but it doesn't make it true. And I think because of that narrative of her being like, oh my gosh, Gale's right, and just starting to like tear herself down, that more people are like, oh yeah, she is playing them, but that doesn't make it true because she's experiencing some cognitive dissonance. She's having thoughts that aren't true and that are troubling and that are harmful and hurtful. And I think it's important to establish that. So anyway, Gale is sitting there manipulating her, telling her, oh, you only go for the people who are hurting the most. But Katniss, I'm really hurting. And all these things. And she's like, I'm sorry. Like, I'm not thinking about my romantic interest right now. And then he's like, he ends up saying something to her. I can't remember if it's that time or like earlier on in the book, but I know it's in Mockingjay, where he's like, oh yeah, do you really think that you're the first person that I've ever kissed? And she's like, I don't know. Have you kissed other people? And he's like, yeah, I kissed a bunch of people at school. Like, I kissed a lot of people before you. And she's like, oh, well then when did you start to like have feelings for me? And he was like, oh, about 6 months before you entered the Hunger Games for the first time. Katniss and Gale had been best friends for 4.5 years. And then like the last half year, that's when Gale started to realize that he kind of had some feelings for Katniss. But if he wasn't doing anything different and just acting like his normal self, you really can't be like, oh, Katniss, you're so oblivious. How did you never find out? When it's like, because he was not interested in me for 4.5 years and he was actively seeing other people, and then he decided that he had feelings for me, but he didn't do anything to like let me know. So she's not stupid. Like, he didn't let her know, and he could have communicated better. And I know that they're teenagers, but still, he could have communicated better. And then I know a lot of people are mad that she ultimately ends up marrying Peeta, but I think in the end, they're going to be the people who understand each other the best. And they're both kind of scarred and hurt to this point where they're not, I don't really think that they're going to mesh well with other people, because sometimes damage, if it goes untreated, and they did try to treat it, but you know, you don't always recover from that, or you don't recover as much as you could. And it might be really comforting to have somebody who understands that with you. Yes, I mean, I hope that Katniss truly loved Peeta, but at the end of the day, it's like they're going to be able to understand and support each other more than anybody else can. And they probably do crave that companionship, and they're the best people to give it to each other. And so I don't fault Katniss for marrying Peeta. And she even says that she loves him. And yeah, she said that she never wanted to get married and that she never wanted kids, but she is living in a safer world now where they don't have to do the Hunger Games. And she says that Peeta really wants kids and that he asks her for several years before she's finally like, okay. But sometimes when you love people, you make compromises. And so her choosing to have 2 kids with Peeta does not mean she's completely abandoning who she was. It means that she grew, she changed, her environment grew, her environment changed, and she chose to make a choice for a person that she loved. And I don't think that means that she betrays who she truly is. I don't agree with everybody's condemnation of her and that she's a horrible player and an awful person and all these things, because I think it's more of everybody else around her forcing her to behave a certain way. And I think that Gale in particular is extremely manipulative, and that little 16-year-old baby Peeta had some really unrealistic expectations, because I don't know why he would think that she was in love with him based on everything that happened in the first Hunger Games. He probably should have figured that out. That's just me. Okay, another problem that people have with her is that she's always really grumpy, and I just disagree. I think that she actually shows a lot of different emotions throughout the book, and that it's like really obvious that she loves and cares about people, but that she's going through some hard things, and that, I don't know, those might impact her or cause her anxiety, and that she may not be super bubbly and bright, but it would also be weird if she were. So I don't really think that that's a thing, and I don't really think that that matters. She is left to operate with like no information the entire time. She keeps talking about how people keep manipulating her and using her, whether it's President Snow, whether it's President Coin, whether in my opinion it's Gale, all these different people. She never really gets to make her own choices, even with Haymitch. She thinks that she does. She thinks that they have an understanding, and that's what she's operating from. But really, people have these big plans for her in the background that they don't tell her about, and then she's just left to operate on her own and make her own decisions. And that would be really frustrating and really hard. And it would be hard to make the right decisions, not knowing that what you're doing is going to have such a huge impact. Because also, as a 16-year-old girl who's grown up in District 12, How could she possibly know that her actions have such a huge impact? But I will say that later, like throughout the series, she does change and she does become more aware. And there was a part in Mockingjay that I did want to point out. It's page 222. Okay, so Katniss is in the hospital. I don't remember why, but I will say she's in the hospital a lot in Mockingjay, which is kind of annoying, but she's in the hospital for one of the million times that she is. And they've just gotten back from going to District 2. And if you like remember what happened there, they needed to go to District 2 because District 2 was where they kept like all of the Capitol's like weapons and peacekeepers and all those. No, they really did keep the peacekeepers there. But they had like this huge mountain that's like full of their supplies and everything. And there's like tunnel systems that go through it and like trains. When they get there, they're like, oh, what's the best thing to do? Like, how do we take this mountain? Gale's like, oh, we should just bomb the mountain. And Katniss is like, no, like that's going to cause a lot of really innocent deaths. And Katniss, you know, has come to really understand and appreciate life and understand when people don't have enough information, they're not always going to make the best choices, you know, especially with her prep team, for example. Like, she's like, yes, I can be mad at them. I can hate them that they prep me and get me ready for the games. And yes, they conceptually understand that we're going to be going into the arena and killing each other, but they've been raised to think that this is normal, and so they don't grasp it the way that we do in the districts. And I'm not saying that that's okay, but I'm also saying that, like, these people should be given a chance and that we shouldn't just kill them all right away for not thinking the way that we do when they weren't raised the way that we were and they don't have the same information that we do. Gale, who's from District 12 and has never really experienced anything else besides his, you know, little trip to 13, is like, no, let's blow it up. So they end up blowing it up, and it's really disastrous. And finally, like, when a train is able to make it out of the mountain, which is hours and hours later, the rebels end up like shooting and killing the people who come out of the trains. And Katniss is like, this is not okay. So this is like Gale talking to Katniss. He comes into her hospital room. He sees, you know, that she's like sitting down and she's hurt and everything. And he says, he strokes my face as the pain ebbs. You've got to stop running straight into trouble. I know, but someone blew up a mountain, I answer. Instead of pulling back, he leans in closer, searching my face. You think I'm heartless. I know you're not, but I won't tell you it's okay, I say. Now he draws back, almost impatiently. Our good old manipulative Gale. Katniss, what difference is there, really, between crushing our enemy in a mine or blowing them out of the sky with one of Beedy's arrows? The result is the same. I don't know. We were under attack in 8, for one thing. The hospital was under attack, I say. Yes, and those hoverplanes came from District 2, he says. So by taking them out, we prevented further attacks. But that kind of thinking, you could turn it into an argument for killing anyone at any time. You could justify sending kids into the Hunger Games to prevent the districts from getting out of line, I say. I don't buy that, he tells me. I do, I reply. It must be those trips to the arena. So I really liked this point because I think this shows that Katniss is growing and that she is beginning to understand the ramifications of her actions. And this conversation in particular really stuck with me because I took a class called The History of Psychology during my undergrad career. And something that my teacher or my professor would always emphasize is that ideas have consequences and that you can come up with an idea, but you can't always control the consequences of that idea. But if it's your idea, you have to be willing to accept those consequences, if that makes sense. And so in Gale's mind, what might seem as an isolated attack of, well, they attacked us, so we're attacking back and we're preventing further attacks, I side with Katniss, and I think that she's right in saying, well, if you use that line of thinking, you're using it in this one specific instance, but it can be used to justify any amount of violence, because I could go into my neighbor's home and murder them and say, well, I was scared that one day they were going to murder me, and so I just took care of it so that couldn't happen. Obviously, that's completely unjustified. I've never even talked to my neighbors. There's no evidence that they're going to murder me. But have neighbors murdered neighbors in the past? Sure. So I could conceivably say that I'm justifying it by taking them out before they can take me out, but really that's just me taking a human life for no solid reason. And it's not accomplishing anything. And so I really like that Katniss is starting to think about the implications, and that she also says throughout the book, throughout Mockingjay, like, I don't know what the best thing is, but I know now, after everything that I've gone through, that I don't want to kill people who don't need to die, and that it doesn't make you feel good, and that it doesn't solve problems. And so I want us to be like judicious about the people that we choose to kill. I want us to really think about this. Even though it might have like a tactical advantage, I want us to sit here and really process and think about, is this the best way? Because for me, my definition of the best way is the way that saves the most lives. And sometimes having a big attack and making that happen quickly will preempt other lives from being taken in the future, so that really might be the best thing. But sometimes tactical decisions that can be really effective are effective because they're really destructive and they maybe didn't need to happen. I don't know, I just thought that was a really good moment for Katniss, showing that she's grown up, she's processing things, she's really thinking hard and trying to make the right decisions. She's not just this stupid girl who runs around kissing everybody and messing everything up. I think that Katniss was more important than she even knows, and that she did do a lot of good, and that she was genuinely a kind person who tried to make a difference. And so, in my defense of Katniss, I don't think that we should give her such a hard time, and that we should appreciate what she did for the, the country of Panem, which isn't even real. But it felt important for me to say. Those are my thoughts on Katniss. Let me know down below if you agree or disagree with anything that I've said. If you're confused about any of the things that I've talked about, I would definitely recommend a reread, because these books are just as good as when I read them the first time. They don't ever get old. Reread these books. Love Katniss. Tell me what you think. And I'll see you guys in my next video. Bye.